This episode of Monster, where Tenma and Dieter tag along with an older couple on a road trip of sorts, is filled with moments that stay ingrained in my mind. These strangers are able to temporarily connect and experience moments of beauty, like taking in the gorgeous scenery of the German countryside, or having a wine they never had before. The image of them staring out at the scenery and getting swept up is one that gets me swept up and wistful as equally. These types of little moments are sprinkled throughout Monster to reinforce the value and beauty of living by just taking in the small pleasantries of life. Like Tenma showing a bunch of kids how to throw a paper airplane, or making people taste Japanese food for the first time, and having a laugh at a dumbass for not being able to use chopsticks properly, which I can relate to because I have the dexterity of a capybara that just had a couple hundred swigs of malt liquor. Before I even watched anime or was interested at all into getting into anime, a friend of mine pitched Monster's general premise to me, and just from what he described got me immediately interested in it. Not only is this premise enticing, but as I eventually watched it, the series took no time sinking its hooks into me, as I became engrossed in one of the richest atmospheres I've seen in anything. No doubt helped by the incredible anime adaptation made by Masayuki Kojima and his team. This initial philosophical conflict on the value of life is one that permeates the entirety of Monster's story, as it spreads out further and further, unwinding many plot threads and touching upon an enormous cast of characters. Monster has a format where Tenma constantly travels, and along the way he meets a plethora of side characters who have their own little mini stories. These stories show Urasawa's writing mastery even when viewed in a bottle, but help build towards the macro story of Monster, touching all kinds of themes relevant to the value of life and Tenma's struggles. Monster's expression of the value of life is frequently gone across through its presentation, specifically music. Like, listen to this track as Maru is treating Tenma to some breakfast.
仕事で追いまくられて気がついてみりゃ女房は娘連れて実家に帰っちまった、
奥さん迎えに行く気はないんですか？
なんでだよ。追んでてったのは向こうだ。なんで俺が迎えに行くんだよ。
There is a specific touch given in the story that makes every moment feel evocative, like you can feel the sheer weight of the beauty in simple things, like a kind stranger treating you to a meal. There's a common criticism that Monster's anime is visually uninspired, which, if you had said this, you are an absolute buffoon, a fool. Look at how good Monster's background art is. Monster constantly has its locations feel full of character and beauty, like the gorgeous countryside of a rural town or the gorgeous architecture of a German city/town. This is all complemented by wonderful sound design that's just... And all of this is exemplified by contrast, just as there are areas that are stunning. Monster's team knows how to make a scene unsettling or terrifying, like the dark ruins of 511 Kinderheim, with nothing but sharp winds rattling the inside. Like this is a place that nature is warning you to stay out of because there could be something around the corner. And then every time Johan shows up, it's like, oh shit! Monster has a consistent through line about finding optimism again through simple things in life, such as the forgiveness of a little girl who, you killed her parents. But most importantly, being able to get hurt, to smile again. Even when his philosophy is challenged, Tenma lives in an earnest way that rubs off on the others around him, like not being able to help but laugh at a hardcore mercenary man unable to use chopsticks. He has a vast knowledge about life, like how hard it is to raise a little chick, or how to fly a kite, or make a paper airplane. This is a man who has lived life earnestly and passes on to the various people he meets across his journey. Whereas Johan spreads his nihilism and pessimism through the others around him, Tenma helps the people around him experience small, delicate, wistful moments that are only possible through living. Johan is able to appeal to someone and get them to do what they want through his charisma, but it's all for pessimistic goals. But Tenma is able to do a similar thing just by being kind-heartedly earnest. Such as in episode 13 when he is the only one able to get Petra to open up and see a doctor, when her stubborn ass didn't permit any doctor to see her. Despite this, Tenma is definitely someone that struggles internally. As his ultimate goal, it's something that contradicts everything he spreads to the people around him. To be able to form the mental fortitude to kill someone requires delving into a mentality of darkness and loneliness. Tenma is a character that is often indirectly described as a loner, how he's shown to be an outsider to his Japanese peers, to often sitting alone in the cafe at his hospital. My favorite example of this is a flashback where Tenma is playing hide and seek back in Japan and is left alone, which young Tenma is terrified by. Even though Tenma makes so many connections throughout the story, he time and time makes the decision to isolate himself and dive deeper into the darkness. Tenma feels alone, is scared of being completely alone, but we know that he isn't alone because he gains the love and respect of everyone he meets and helps, which makes this sort of downward spiral doubting himself and his way of life more sad. Theater is a primary example of the positive effect Tenma has, spreading his philosophy on the value of life. As he was a closed-off kid who sucked up everything bad that happened to him, since Hartman tells him how dark the world is with terrible things always happening. Tenma tells him this isn't true, simply saying, tomorrow will be a good day. A saying so simple but incredibly moving and puts Dieter on the right track, gaining autonomy as he makes the decision to leave his abuser behind and goes with Tenma. Throughout the story, he becomes more and more expressive, seen finding joys in things and making connections with Tenma and Nina, declaring them to be his friends. In episode 33, he meets a kid who acts as his foil, since this kid could have easily have been Dieter if he met Tenma instead of Johan. But he's able to get through to the other kid by passing on the kindness and optimism that Tenma passed to him, saying aloud the ethos of Monster.
分かったよ。君の言ってることはよくわかるよ。世界は真っ暗だと思ってた。明日は真っ暗だと思ってた。君は何が好物だ？僕はこの前とっても美味しいソーセージを食べた。でも死んだらもう二度と食べられなくなる。臆病者。僕はサッカーが好きだ。でも死んだらボール蹴れなくなる。弱虫。ライヒワイン先生が好きだ。秘書のメレスさんも優しい人だ。でも死んだら会えなくなる。怖いものなんかなくならない。だから大人になるんだって言ってた。明日はいい日だって天馬が言ってた。死んだら天馬に会えなくなる。
This focus on the beauty of living all slowly ingrains this feeling of empathy into the series. Mr. Rosso quit his life as an assassin because he couldn't go through with popping one in between the eyes of a target because that target uses the same amount of sugar in his coffee as Rosso. And this rips Rosso out of his narrow, focused, killer mindset. This simple, mundane joy of drinking a cup of coffee just the way you like it. After this, he is a man that lives life with his heart on his sleeve, always crying during movies and drinking coffee. When he says killing is easy, just forget the taste of sugar. He's saying if you forget these small things that humanize us and make us appreciate small joys of life, only then can you kill someone with a clear conscience. Monster's execution of his characters help us understand that life is complicated for people. People do horrible things, but people are able to forget these things and move on. Characters with small amounts of screen time still end up being incredibly substantial because of how they all tie into Monster's core sentiments. Such as Dr. Schumann, a man who used to care only for raising his position as a doctor and neglected conversing deeply with his patients. He ends up finding out what is really important only after losing his wife due to his negligence. Now he is able to work on a small scale being the local doctor and makes connections with the people around him, even knowing people's circumstances by heart, and is now able to save many lives and values life itself much more because of this, and his meeting with Tenma. And it's after his path converges with Tenma that he is able to marry again, showing how Tenma made him feel deserving of marriage again. Did I mention this character only appears in 2 episodes? Like, holy moly, Urasawa's side character writing is. Another character, Mueller, marries into a family and learns what it's like to have something you don't want to lose, which makes him regret murdering Nina's parents. A man with a violent past who learns the value of all life as he experiences love, only for it to be tragically cut short, as his last moments are him being embraced in a beautiful, melancholic sunset. Guy Pearce. Martin Rees' experience with the people he cares about living life self-destructively to the point of bringing them on death's door ends up rejecting any sort of pessimistic feelings, saying that nobody ever wants to die. Christoph Severnik is a character that I see a lot of the monster fandom go, yo, I hate this guy. But I can't help but feel like they missed the point. Even though Christoph is presented as incredibly antagonistic, we know he suffered through 511 Kinderheim and was stripped of his identity and feelings. As we see in the last scene with him, he doesn't understand why Ava is crying in this very lamentable tone. The side characters are amazing, but the main cast is what really helps accentuate this theme by showing them lost in life and missing out on the beauty of simple things. Like Lunge is pretty much described as a robot indirectly. He literally takes in information by typing into himself like he's some sort of fucking computer. He lives only really for his job, to the point of getting basically no sleep and having zero interaction with his family at all. Like, how does he not interact with them at all? How did this dude get laid? He's so obsessed with this process of proving people guilty that he can't even entertain Tenma being innocent for the majority of the story, because something like Johan seems so out there to him. Due to his obsessiveness with his job, his family leaves him and he eventually fucks up on his job so bad that he gets taken off a bunch of cases, only left on Tenma's case, which triples his obsessiveness on following Tenma. At one point, he starts to go through his process of replicating Tenma's thought process and finds out Tenma was a loner in Japanese society, so he isolates himself from other Japanese businessmen when on an outing with them. In this moment, he exclaims in his head, "I am alone," which is a genius moment because it not only alludes to Lunge realizing Tenma is alone, but realizing that he himself is alone. After this moment and being confronted more and more with the idea that Johan exists, Lunge goes on a vacation where he spends his time unraveling the mystery of Johan. He tells Vertiman that this vacation is a bit of an escape for him, which is alluding to him maybe trying to escape from the dehumanizing job he has, to find identity for himself. When he initially goes on vacation, he doesn't even know what to do to enjoy himself, having to jump into the identity of someone on vacation to realize he needs beer instead of coffee. Like, this dude is a mess. From little bits of subtext, you can tell that Lunge ends up longing for connection, like when he feels anger at Roberto taunting him over his grandchild possibly never meeting him, which would be unusual for him at the beginning of the story. He quits being an inspector in the end, separating himself from a job that makes him dehumanize himself, and then slowly reaches out to his daughter, lost on what he can convey to her, but just the fact that he's trying is an amazing leap. Ava is a character who is so stuck in what she thinks will make her life better, she can't appreciate the small things. Like a lunch in the park with Tenma, where she goes, "Fuck this rock," and escapes from her troubles with alcoholism and sleeping with men. Ava is constantly trying to use forms of escapism because of how miserable she is, even hyper-focusing on Tenma because she thinks he will bring her happiness since he's the only one who treated her right. To it slowly twisting with this outward portrayal of spite as she frames her obsession of him with one of revenge, But these are all just forms of escape for someone who doesn't know how to cope properly. But through little moments in her relationship with Martin, she stops these self-destructive habits, quitting drinking and even trying to stop the larger conflict herself by trying to kill Johan and girl-bossing herself over Kristoff. Grimmer is a character who, when we are initially introduced to him, appears as a happy-go-lucky man who knows how to enjoy simple wonders like setting up a picnic on a cliff with a nice view, which I can never do because I can't be 5 feet above the ground without a diaper. This aspect about him is pretty endearing from the get-go, but it's after you get the full picture of his story that this becomes especially beautiful. Because of his time at 511 Kinderheim, destroying his emotions, appreciating the things that make us human don't come intuitively to Grimmer, to the point where he even had to practice smiling. Grimmer feels like a self-assured man, but we see that he is actually a lost soul. But through his own persistence in trying to find those emotions by appreciating the small things and passing on kindness to others, and making connections and trying to uncover the secrets around child experimentation, maybe through these things he can become quote-unquote human again, such as when he is able to get through to Milos by learning to cry for the first time. Grimmer's character is possibly the most inspiring in Monster, despite his inability to fully appreciate the beauty of the world around him. He is able to conceptualize it and understand it and becomes a supporter of it as he passes on kindness and appreciation for life to others. He lashes out at Franz Bonaparte for his crimes because he understands how we need emotions, identity, and morality. They are what let us live properly, and being stripped of these things make us more separated from the people around us, making them lash out at the world. People need to be able to appreciate the simple joys in life, a delicious picnic or beer, or even to feel sorrow for when you lose a loved one, or to have love itself. Monster's insistent sentiment about the value of life could easily be presented as overly sappy and platitudinal, but is balanced by showing us the other side of the coin through life's more harrowing aspects. Johan Lieber is a walking embodiment of pessimism, as growing up he experienced strings of circumstances that make me think, yeah, I'd probably be a little fucked up too if I went through all that. Johan contrasts characters like Tenma and Grimmer by completely opposing Tenma's philosophy of kindness and optimism. Him and Grimmer are direct foils for one another, as they have gone through similar circumstances, such as the very obvious connection of 511 Kinderheim. Unlike Grimmer, Johan doesn't choose to spread kindness and persistently grasp onto hope despite the bad hand he has been dealt. The tragedy of which is exemplified by how, like Grimmer and Tenma, he has been shown to give people glimmers of hope by exposing them to precious moments, like when he gets Schubert to remember the forest he loved despite it being torn down, moving Schubert to tears. Johan instead uses this charisma to break down people's hope in the world and themselves, as he did with Richard Braun and attempted to with Milos, frequently encouraging and fueling destructive behavior in people.
これで薬を買うといい。
There's so much to interpret from Johan that I don't think I could do him justice by just having a little section of the video carved out for him. But Johan's implementation into the story of Monster, being the glimpse into the darkness of the human condition, is absolutely perfect and is what really pulls the story together. The way his perspective paints a distressful, bleak outlook on the world that, with our own experience, can be pretty convincing sometimes. The root of Johan's outlook is somewhat ambiguous, as his past is unraveled throughout the story. There are revelations that make us go, okay, this had to be the part where he broke. But then they give us another one, and we go, oh, okay, I guess it's this one. And then they give us another one, until we're left with Johan talking about how being unsure of how his mother meant to protect him or confused him with his sister had a profound impact on him. This is implied to be the root of Johan as we know him. Someone who at a young age had to question the extent of his own mother's love for him, which feels so small scale compared to literal human experimentation and child massacres over here, but I think it's the most profound, as it's something that can be the root of any regular person's nihilism. And on top of that, Johan deeply values his bond with Anna, which breaks him down even further when he becomes irredeemable in her eyes. This feeling of being rejected by his family drives him to desolation, and this is when Tenma's kindness confuses him, and so he wants to get him to kill him to prove him wrong, along with his ultimate goal of the ultimate suicide, as being erased from this world is what he feels he ultimately deserves. A lot of Monster comes back to what I believe might be one of the most important parts of the human condition according to Urasawa, which is love. Johan's descent into darkness is ultimately due to the absence of others' love for him, and so many of the 511 Kinderheim's remnants as well. But Monster focuses on how love is also a saving grace for people, like the newfound love between an adoptive father and the girl he is responsible for orphaning, the found family between people from different nationalities in Milan Kulas's house, the love between Mueller and his new family, Schubert and his son. Mart and Ava are able to put each other on the right track even if Mart's life was tragically truncated. And even though it's tragic, I think Grimmer's deeply buried love for his child is what put him on the right track. Monster even says how important love is out loud.
虚無、破壊衝動、闇に取り込まれない人間を作りたかった。どうやると思うね。愛情。まったく新しい発見だったよ。
When the plot unravels and we find that there is a person who is possibly responsible for manufacturing Johan as we know him, presented through the very malevolent framing as we get glimpses of him through other characters recounting of him. But when we finally meet Franz Bonaparte in the present day, the man who started this entire story by being responsible for people losing the things that make them human and value life, he has become an empathetic old man who has learned the value of life. By falling in love with Johan and Anna's mother, and then by living with kind, loving people in a peaceful town, is a stroke of brilliance and perfectly encapsulates what Monster is trying to say. Even though this is an often unsettling story, Monster's kindness and optimism never wavers. Lunge is able to step away from his job that makes him dehumanize himself and make steps to connecting with his daughter. Ava sobers up, commenting in her final scenes that eventually sadness fades and only happy memories remain. Nina's empathy persists after it being constantly challenged as she comes face to face with the people who have subjected her to indescribable darkness. She is able to forgive and continues working towards a career where she has to believe in people inherently. Grimmer is able to fully connect with his emotions as he is dying, being able to feel the beautiful whirlwind of emotions human life brings, as he realizes that people have the capability of becoming human again. And Tenma saves Johan, putting faith into his philosophy and life once again, and becomes a doctor that travels the world, making those same delicate connections with his patients like he did throughout the series. With the characters able to find value in living, even if it's at the very end, Monster confidently shows us the value in just being alive. When Lunge investigates Johan's college dorm room early in the story, he makes a comment about how he has never seen a room that had no trace of something human living there. But at the very end, as we are greeted with the emptiness of the hospital room Johan was staying in, implying that he escaped, he leaves behind a messy bed, a definite sign that a human had been there. In the end, Johan, the walking personification of pessimism and nihilism, possibly escapes into the world once again in the very last scene. But his exit is painted by a breeze and the sounds of birds chirping and just enough sun shining through.